Welcome back to the EU Decoded podcast. Today, we are diving into the future of European security and transatlantic cooperation, of course, ahead of the upcoming NATO Summit in The Hague.
We have too long used the peace dividend.
We have to think how it's possible to defend ourselves by ourselves.
We have to decide how to create a credible deterrence.
You just heard from General Riho Terras, former commander of the Estonian Defence Forces, General Christophe Gomart, former director of French military intelligence and special operations commander, and Nicolás Pascual de la Parte, former Spanish ambassador to NATO. And all three are now members of the European Parliament with the EPP Group. With Russia's war against Ukraine still raging and tensions escalating in the Middle East, world leaders are facing a growing number of security crises. In a world filled with real and mounting threats, how should the EU respond and adapt to these challenges? General Terras highlights the growing divide between democracies and authoritarian regimes.
There we see a very clear confrontation, democracies versus authoritarian regimes. And that's not only Russia in Ukraine, it's actually Iran who is supporting Russia, with China. We have so many challenges, and we have too long used the peace dividend, and we believed in Francis Fukuyama's end of history. Unfortunately, this prediction was wrong. Now we need very quickly to speed up our defense capability development in our NATO countries. All countries need to increase the defense budgets as soon as possible, but not later than next year or year after, which means that we have to get an agreement between the NATO allies of increasing the defense budgets on the 5% of the GDP.
The conflict in the Middle East is another major source of instability. General Christophe Gomart notes that even though Europe isn't directly involved in the Israel-Iran confrontation, it could still face serious consequences.
Europe is not directly targeted by what it happens in the Middle East, of course, but the consequences could be target EU. Because for USA, that's a new challenge, because USA today are focused on China. There is an ambiguity with Russia, because we don't know exactly what they want about Russia. When you see Trump is speaking with Putin, but we don't say exactly what they said between them. So there is no directly consequence on Europe. But that's the main point for the geopolitical situation all over the world. And we have to follow the situation, of course, because the consequences will be very big. For example, if the Hormuz Destroy is closed.
Nicolás Pascual de la Parte underscores that Europe must prepare for worst-case scenarios while continuing to rely on the United States as a key strategic partner.
In principle, we have to count on the Americans. The Americans provide us with all the strategic enablers which are necessary for our common defense. And I think that they don't want to withdraw from NATO. I think that they want to stay in another condition with a kind of a fairer distribution of the responsibilities, of the capabilities, of the financing, fair burden. But having said that, I think that they want to have a strong European pillar without the structure of NATO and not to withdraw. Don't forget that for the US, NATO is a good business, very good business. And there is no other collective organization, defense organization that could substitute NATO.
Many NATO countries have already announced increases in defense spending. General Terras says all allies must pay their fair share.
Russia has shown that it is willing and able to use conventional military means to achieve its objectives. They have fought the war in Georgia. They almost won there now. They are fighting the war against democracies in Ukraine, and they're producing in high-speed military equipment. And we need to respond the same way as soon as possible. We need to stop figure skating the time where Russia plays ice hockey. We need to play ice hockey ourselves, which means we need much better defense capabilities in NATO countries, this side and the other side of the Atlantic Ocean.
NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte recently warned that Russia could produce 4 times more ammunition than all NATO countries combined. General Christophe Gomart adds that Vladimir Putin has transformed Russia's economy into a war economy.
We are not in a war economy. And Russia, they have prepared and they have a lot of stockpiles of ammunition we don't have. That's why you have to spend more money if we want to produce more ammunition. We need public orders, and we have to increase our own EU budgets to be sure that we are able to build more, to buy more tanks, more fighters, more shells, more ammunition, etc.
US President Donald Trump pressured NATO countries to increase their defence spending, even threatening that the US might not defend those who don't contribute enough. Still, the alliance remains highly beneficial for all its members. Christophe Gomart says that Washington's approach should push EU countries to develop an alternative plan to ensure their own security.
That's a good opportunity for EU members to say what they want exactly. Because when you think about NATO, NATO needs to decide military operations, needs unanimity. And it's impossible to have unanimity because NATO is 32 countries and 9 of them don't belong to the EU. Do you think that Turkey wants to fight for EU? I'm not sure. Do you think that Canada wants to fight for EU? I'm not sure. That's why we need to think another organization. Because when you speak about the USA, when you listen to what Trump is saying, maybe that NATO let us down, let European countries down. Because I know very well US armed forces, because I was, thanks to my previous life, my military career, I was engaged with US armed forces. And several times they left very soon, as sooner than we think, in Afghanistan, in Syria, with special forces. Suddenly, US forces have left. So we have to think, and for EU members, they have to think about a sudden withdrawal of USA.
Still, Nicolás Pascual de la Parte says NATO remains one of the most cost-effective ways to protect Europe and promote global stability.
The budget for NATO is very reduced. NATO has not common weapons or equipment. It has only 3 AWACS. The rest are the capabilities of the single member states. NATO as such has only the military structure in Brussels and the political structure. Then at the same time, NATO allows the Americans to have a kind of defensive mattress of 2,000 kilometers. The strategic objective of the Americans to have allies on both sides of the oceans. On the Atlantic side, European Union, they have it. On the other side, the Pacific, they have Japan, New Zealand, Australia, South Korea. They have friends and allies on both sides of the Atlantics. But at the same time here with NATO, they have what you call deep defense, 2,000 kilometers eastwards towards Russia. Then the European Union and NATO as such is a kind of mattress, security mattress for the European Union and for the United States. In addition to this, the Congress approved last year a law that makes it very difficult for any American president to withdraw America from NATO. It can reduce the delivery, it can reduce the presence of troops in Europe, but to withdraw entirely from NATO is very difficult, legally speaking, in the US. Then I think that it is in the interest of our American allies and friends, as well as in the Europeans, to have a stronger European pillar of NATO and a fair burden sharing. And that's what we are going to discuss, and an increase in the investment in procurement and defense. And I think that these things are going to be debated and discussed upon this next week, as you said, and I think that we will come to a consensus there.
General Terras concludes that in today's turbulent world, NATO must continue to serve as a pillar of stability.
I think the most important thing is we have to show to the world that NATO, the strongest alliance since 76 years, is still alive, still very powerful. We have to show the unity, we have to show the transatlantic link and the bond, and we need to succeed with that because there are so many challengers in the world, and the world needs a strong NATO today.
Well, that's it for today's episode of EU Decoded. To stay up to date with the latest in EU politics, follow on social media and visit the website at eppgroup.eu. Thanks for listening and see you next time.